Alright, so chapter 28 is all about communicating in groups. And like I said, chapter 28 and 29 quiz is postponed until Sunday, so you have time to fill it in. So the reality is that you will be working in groups throughout college and throughout your life. Probably at most jobs that you will be doing, you will be forced to be working in a group, whether you like it or not. That is just how reality works. And if we were in class right now, I'd ask you to raise your hands if you ever had to work in a group, and I guarantee that most likely everyone would raise their hand. So this is the reason why this is a chapter that we are covering, because it is a skill that you can be using in your life to help guide you not only in your academic career, but after your academic career. So when we are more mindful of how groups work, when we understand it a bit on a deeper level, then we can make ourselves and our group members much more effective, and we can achieve goals as a group much more effectively. So if you would like, feel free to share in the discussion board any story if you have a really funny one, or any story you would like about an experience that you had working in a group, if it was a really bad one or if it was a really good one. I'm sure everyone's experienced being in a group with someone who did not do their work at all. So the phrase all teams are groups, but not all groups are teams. So normally we would kind of discuss this in class. So once again, feel free to kind of talk about that if you'd like in the discussion board comments. As I go through this chapter, I will kind of leave these questions for you here so that you can discuss them in the discussion board if you would like, or just ponder them to yourself. All teams are groups, but not all groups are teams. So hopefully what you're taking away from that is kind of what we've been talking about so far, that it's often that not every time that we work in a group are we able to really create this cohesiveness and achieve the results that we'd like in the group. Oftentimes the group kind of falls apart, so it's not really a team. So today we're going to be talking about how can we create a bit more of an effective communication within your groups, since you will be working in groups during this time as you're working on the LCP assignment. So first of all groups have characteristics. And those characteristics are a shared identity, a common goal, and the interdependence of the members. So really quickly, basically, as a group, you all have an identity. You can be a social support group, you can be a study group, you can be a primary group. So basically, like your family, most likely, the people that are kind of a group that is with you throughout your life. A group can be whatever group, and its identity is usually very closely related to the common goal. So your primary group, your family, probably has the identity of a family. And the common goals are just these things that you all would like to achieve, the reason for why you are in this group. In your primary group, your family, you most likely are there for social support or support of other kinds. And then when it comes to a study group, your common goal is probably to get a good grade, and this is most likely the goal that you will have in your groups for the LCP project. And lastly, interdependent relationships. So all groups have interdependence between its members. The members of the group depend on each other in order to achieve their goals. So for your group right now, you depend on each other in order to receive a good grade, because you will receive the same grade even though all of you will be putting in the work. So it's very important that everything goes fairly and effectively. And this is what we're trying to achieve here. So being aware of the type and function of the group, what is the identity of the group, the goals of the group, and the relationships within it, recognizing all those things and even thinking about them, even for just a split second, will help you determine what is needed from you as a group member. And on table 28.1 on page 458 in your book, there is a table that kind of goes over the things that you can do in the very first meeting, or rather before the meeting, to kind of answer some of those questions and prepare yourself for the communication you're about to have. Because as we're going to see in a little bit, the very first stage of your the very first meeting you have is the very first stage in your communication, which is kind of formative for how the rest of your group communication is going to go. So I recommend taking a look at that table right before you have your first group meeting. So now we've learned a little bit about the kind of characteristics that are present in all types of different groups. Now we're going to talk about ways of looking at group formation. So basically, there are different ways that groups form and progress and develop. And we're going to cover the two different theories on that. Tuckman's stages is a theory that says there are 5 different stages that go in a linear there are 5 different stages and they are in a linear formation. So Tuckman says that your groups will form, and this is what I was talking about just now, that in your first meeting you kind of form your opinions of each other and what you think your roles are, and you kind of establish that whether you communicated about it verbally or not, you kind of create that in your mind, your own role and the roles of others. Then there comes the stage of storming, which is when things are kind of not working out, and it is a very necessary stage for every group formation according to Tuckman, whether that's a family relationship or any other group. Tuckman believes that storming is going to take place whether it is very aggressive or not. It is still considered storming. So for example, if you're in a group and then you start to have conflicts with each other about whose responsibility was what, that is storming. But if those arguments are very mild and you simply misunderstand each other but are able to find understanding eventually, that is still considered storming, because it's that part of the group formation where you are kind of finding these places where things don't quite fit together, and nothing fits together perfectly, which is why storming is always a part of group formation. So then we move on to norming, which is, as I was saying, you finally find understanding with one another, you are able to kind of solve those issues that have been coming up, able to recognize, okay, maybe I was misunderstanding my role here, and this is what it's going to be from now on. You kind of focus on these shared goals that we talked about for the group and focus on that. And that leads into the performing stage, which is where you've identified all those things and now you're just kind of maintaining it. Things are great, you are achieving what you need to be achieving. And lastly, there is adjourning, which is the last stage where the group kind of disbands when you're done. You've achieved all you needed to achieve. And here you can either be celebrating, oh, okay, we did great. You have a little party, or just send each other a couple of texts of happiness, or you simply disband without any communication at all. This is the stage where you disband, you're done. No longer communicate with each other and you're no longer a group. So Tuckman basically said that this is a linear model from start to end and it has to be in that order. And there's actually been recent research which said that this linear model works not only in person, but for visual group communication as well. So whether you're doing it online or not, which you will be doing it online, your group will still be going through the same process. So you will be able to see, oh, okay, our group is going through this. I personally believe that the Tuckman stages don't have to be linear. From my experience, you can kind of go from norming to storming and to norming again, back and forth before you move on to performing. But Tuckman's idea is that it is a linear model. However, there is another model that is not very linear, and this model is the Gersich model, punctuated equilibrium. And this model basically talks about how groups experience times of inactivity In other words, procrastination, times where you are like, okay, well, I don't know what we have to do, and nobody kind of says anything, and you don't really talk to each other. And then eventually there comes some kind of breaking point where you start to feel the pressure, and that's when people just start to communicate and the group dynamic starts to develop. And that's essentially Gersig's theory, and it's not as linear as the other one because it kind of says that there's just periods of times when the group's inactive or active. So that's really the entire theory on group dynamics from Gersig. And one thing I would ask you to think about here or talk about in the group is, what can you do about this? What do you think you can do about this? If this is true and this is what you've experienced in your groups, that you go through procrastination periods, how can you prevent that if that has been not helpful to you to have that much time procrastinated? So now we're moving on to group communication, right? So we've talked about the characteristics of communication, the way that group communication develops, the different theories, and now we're going to talk about why is group communication hard. So probably you can tell a lot of these things from your own experiences, but sizes of the group can make it hard. Communicating in the classroom can be difficult. Sometimes people don't want to share, sometimes they don't know how to share. Remember when we went over our, when we not went over, but when we played the game with the numbers, and we kind of struggled at first to know who's gonna speak up and who's not. So that's kind of a perfect example of how the size of a group makes it hard to communicate. Then also there's such a thing as cliques and factions that develop. So basically, maybe one person can be ostracized in a group for whatever reason. They're not communicated with or not respected. Or it can be two people that are ostracized, or maybe two people become create a clique where they kind of don't communicate as much outside of that clique. So these are all the types of things that I'm sure you've experienced in all kinds of communications and friendships. So that makes it hard for group communication as well. Ideas can get lost when this happens. When you have a big size group, when there's cliques, somebody's voice is always not heard. Then there's this thing called social loafing, and there's a quiz in your book on page 469 that will tell you if you're a social loafer. So social loafer is just when one person in the group, well, it could be more than one, but when one or some people in the group are not really doing their part. And that doesn't always have to be just because they're lazy, but it involves essentially somebody not speaking up, not doing their job, not taking the initiative when maybe others are, and so they end up doing not as much as other people in the group are. So they're social loafing. This could happen if you are, let's say, talking online and then somebody has maybe not as much of a good connection, and then maybe they kind of go into the background and their voice is not heard. And then maybe sometimes you felt like you were working too hard and others weren't. And so you decide to slack off a bit. So this is also loafing because you decide to take a load off of your shoulders. So hopefully this gives you a bit of a better idea of the different reasons why sometimes people kind of slack. So how do you fight this? Well, here's some of the things that I presented on how to fight this. But you're welcome to talk about and present your own ideas. But you want to establish goals and deadlines. You want to have somebody who's going to keep people accountable, and you want to kind of, like I said earlier, think about that team identity. What is your shared goal? What are you guys as a team? What identifies you? Maybe are you students, or are you nursing students, or are you all communication majors, or are you all friends, etc. So kind of having that team identity and speaking about it out loud can help motivate and eliminate some social loafing. And lastly, do a good job at staying in contact, so please make sure you're using GroupMe. So, and how communication flows, who is the keeper of the flame? So this is essentially trying to get you to think about who is going to be that leader in the group who's going to make sure communication keeps happening. So in the classroom, that's me. I am the key